I'm Elsie Bennett, and I'm 28 years old. Last night at my engagement dinner, my future mother-in-law handed me a maid's uniform, and the entire room erupted in laughter. My fiance looked me dead in the eye and said, "Perfect, she'll need it." I didn't say a word, didn't storm out, didn't throw the uniform back at her. I simply glanced at my mother across the table, and in that single look, she understood everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But first, let me back up 2 months to show you how I got here. Because trust me, you're going to want to hear this whole story. I was in my corner office on the 42nd floor, reviewing contracts for what could be the biggest deal in Bennett Holdings history. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of downtown, and my father's picture on the desk reminded me every day why I fought so hard to keep his legacy alive. After Dad died 3 years ago, people expected our family business to crumble. What they got instead was me and my mother, Margaret Bennett, proving that sometimes the best revenge is success. "Elsie, the Hartman representatives are here," my assistant announced over the intercom. I straightened my blazer and checked my reflection in the window. In the business world, first impressions aren't just important, they're everything. Today's meeting could secure Bennett Holdings for the next decade. The conference room filled with the usual suspects, lawyers, accountants, and executives in identical Navy suits. But then Caleb Hartman walked in, and I'll admit he wasn't what I expected. Tall, confident, with a smile that probably opened the doors before he even spoke. Most CEOs' sons I'd met were entitled brats coasting on family money. Caleb seemed different. "Miss Bennett," he said, extending his hand, "I've heard incredible things about what you've accomplished here." Professional handshake, direct eye contact, and he'd clearly done his homework. Point for Caleb. The meeting went smoothly. Hartman Industries wanted to partner with us on a massive infrastructure project, and their numbers looked solid. But I noticed something interesting. Caleb kept steering the conversation back to our company's internal operations, asking detailed questions about decision-making processes and management structure. "Your mother must be incredibly proud," he said as we wrapped up. "Taking over leadership after such a loss couldn't have been easy, but she clearly trusts you completely with major decisions." "She's remarkable," I replied. Though I handle most of the day-to-day operations now, his eyes lit up with what I thought was admiration. Looking back, I realized it was calculation. After the meeting, instead of leaving with his team, Caleb lingered. "I know this might be forward, but would you be interested in continuing our discussion over dinner? Strictly business, of course." I should have stuck to my rule about mixing business with personal matters, but something about his directness appealed to me. Plus, I reasoned, it could only help our negotiations. Strictly business, I agreed. That dinner lasted 4 hours. We talked about market trends, expansion opportunities, and the challenges of working in family businesses. He was intelligent, funny, and genuinely interested in my perspectives on corporate strategy. He told amusing stories about his college years, asked thoughtful questions about my favorite books, and even remembered that I'd mentioned loving classical music during our business meeting. When he walked me to my car, he said, "I hope we'll have more opportunities to collaborate." The way he said collaborate suggested he wasn't just talking about business anymore. 3 days later, flowers arrived at my office. Not the typical dozen red roses, but a stunning arrangement of white orchids with a note, "Looking forward to our next negotiation, Caleb." My assistant Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Should I be updating your calendar for personal appointments?" I said, "Don't get ahead of yourself," but I was already wondering when he might call. Caleb didn't wait long. Within a week, he'd found reasons to call about contract clarifications that somehow always ended up with invitations to lunch, dinner, or weekend events. And honestly, I was enjoying myself. You have to understand, my social life had been practically non-existent since Dad died. Between running the company and supporting my mother through her grief, I hadn't had time for dating. Most men I met were either intimidated by my position or clearly interested in my family's wealth. Caleb seemed refreshingly unbothered by both. Our third date was at a private wine tasting in Napa. He'd arranged everything: the helicopter ride, the exclusive vineyard tour, even ensuring my favorite Pinot Noir was featured. The level of planning was impressive, though I wondered how he had learned so much about my preferences so quickly. "This is incredible," I said, watching the sunset paint the valley golden. "How did you arrange all this on such short notice?" "When something's important to you, you make it happen," he replied, moving closer. "And getting to know you has become very important to me." It was smooth, maybe too smooth, but I was tired of overthinking everything. When he kissed me as we stood overlooking the vineyards, it felt like the perfect end to a perfect day. Over the following weeks, Caleb integrated himself into my life with surprising ease. He sent coffee to my office on busy mornings, remembered details about my meetings, and always seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear after difficult days. But then came the questions. "Your mother is incredibly sharp," he said during dinner at my apartment. "Does she handle all the major financial decisions, or do you have signing authority too?" I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. Something about his tone felt off, too casual for such a specific question. But his smile was warm, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. "We make decisions together." "Why?" "Just curious about your company structure. My father keeps pretty tight control over our operations. Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever really let me take the reins." It seemed innocent enough, two adult children discussing family business dynamics. But over the next few dates, I noticed a pattern. Caleb always found ways to steer conversations toward Bennett Holdings' internal operations, our acquisition strategies, and our client relationships. The night everything shifted was during a dinner party at his family's estate. The Hartman mansion was everything you'd expect: sprawling, intimidating, and decorated with the kind of old money taste that screamed, "We've been wealthy longer than you've been alive." His mother, Victoria Hartman, greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Elsie, darling, so lovely to finally meet Caleb's little friend." Little friend. I was 28, running a multi-million-dollar company, but to her, I was a little friend. The dinner conversation was pleasant enough, though I felt constantly evaluated. Victoria asked me about my education, my family background, and hobbies, as if my career were something I did for fun between charity lunches. "And what exactly do you do at your family's company?" she asked, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. "I serve as Chief Operations Officer. I oversee all major projects and handle most client relationships." "How nice that your mother gives you something important to do." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. I caught Caleb's eye, expecting some support, but he just smiled and changed the subject. After dinner, as we walked through their gardens, I mentioned Victoria's comments. "Don't take it personally," Caleb said, his arm around my waist. "She's protective of me. She'll warm up once she realizes how amazing you are." It felt like she was interviewing me for a position. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Maybe she was. Maybe we both were. Before I could ask what he meant, he pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. We'd been dating for 2 months. 2 months. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was too fast, too sudden. But standing there in the moonlight, surrounded by roses, and this charming man declaring his love, rational thought felt overrated. "Elsie Bennett." He dropped to one knee right there in his mother's prize-winning rose garden. "Will you marry me?" 2 months. That's how long Caleb Hartman had known me before deciding I was marriage material. And apparently, that was enough time for me to lose my mind and say yes. I blamed the roses. Everything seemed more romantic, surrounded by his mother's award-winning garden, with moonlight casting everything in a soft glow. Plus, the ring was stunning, a flawless 3-carat diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. But mostly, I blamed the fairy tale of it all. Caleb Hartman, successful businessman and apparent romantic, had swept me off my feet. After years of workaholic isolation, someone wanted to build a life with me. Someone who understood the pressures of family business, appreciated my ambition, and seemed to see me as more than just another executive in a skirt. At least that's what I told myself the next morning when reality started creeping in. "Congratulations, darling," my mother said when I called to share the news. But after a pause, she added, "That's quite sudden, isn't it?" "When you know, you know," I replied, using Caleb's exact words from the night before. Another pause. "I'd love to meet with both of you soon. Perhaps we can discuss the business implications." Business implications. Trust my mother to cut straight to practical concerns. But she was right. Marrying Caleb would definitely affect our negotiations with Hartman Industries. We'd need to establish clear boundaries between personal and professional relationships. The engagement announcement in the Business Journal triggered a flood of congratulations, but also some interesting comments from colleagues familiar with the Hartmans. "Interesting family dynamic over there," my lawyer friend David remarked during lunch. "Victoria Hartman runs that company with an iron fist. Caleb's always been more of a figurehead." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Smart guy, don't get me wrong, but major decisions still go through his mom. She's the one who rebuilt their success after Caleb's father nearly bankrupted them 15 years ago." This was news to me. Caleb had painted his family's business as a collaborative effort in which he played a significant leadership role. That evening, I mentioned David's comments to Caleb over dinner. "David Morgan's always been jealous of our success," Caleb said dismissively. "He tried to poach several of our clients last year. I wouldn't put much stock in his opinions." But it was the way he immediately changed the subject that stuck with me. Engagement party planning began almost immediately, and that's when I got my first real glimpse of Victoria Hartman in action. She took over every detail, from the venue to the guest list to the menu, treating me like a supporting character in her son's life story. "I've booked the country club for next month," she announced during what was supposed to be our planning meeting. "Saturday evening, cocktail attire. The usual crowd will attend." "Actually," I interjected, "I was hoping we could discuss the guest list together. I have family and friends I'd like to include." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course, dear. Just send me a list and I'll see what can be accommodated." See what can be accommodated? At my own engagement party? But the real warning signs began appearing during our romantic dinners. Caleb had developed a habit of asking increasingly specific questions about Bennett Holdings' operations. "Your company's growth strategy is fascinating," he said over wine one evening. "I admire how Bennett Holdings has stayed true to your father's founding vision while still expanding. That kind of authentic growth is rare in today's market." Something about his interest felt flattering, though a small voice in my head wondered why he was so focused on our business philosophy. I pushed the thought aside. After all, we both ran family companies. It made sense that he'd be curious about our approach. There it was again, his focus on what our companies could gain from each other, rather than what we meant to each other personally. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone you trusted starts showing you who they really are? Comment below if you've ever felt like you were being studied rather than loved. A week before the engagement party, Caleb suggested I move into the Hartman family estate after our wedding. "It makes financial sense," he explained over breakfast. "The house is enormous, you'd have your own wing, and it would be good for family unity." I love my condo. I designed every room exactly how I wanted it. But this would be temporary, just until we find our own place. Something about the way he said temporary made it sound permanent. "Actually, I was thinking we could live at my place initially. It's closer to both of our offices." Caleb's expression shifted just for a moment to something that looked almost like annoyance before his smile returned. "We'll figure it out," he said, but his tone had noticeably cooled. The doubts began multiplying like compound interest. It wasn't any single moment, but rather an accumulation of small incidents that individually seemed reasonable, but collectively painted a troubling picture. Caleb's constant questions about my company's finances, Victoria's thinly veiled assessments of my suitability, and the growing pressure to blend our business interests in ways that favored the Hartmans. The breaking point came during what should have been a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant. Caleb had been drinking more than usual, expensive scotch that loosened his tongue in ways that would haunt me later. "You know," he said, his words slightly slurred, "I have to admit, when my mother first mentioned that getting to know you better might help our business relationship, I thought she was being overly strategic. I nearly choked on my wine. Help our business relationship? How?" He laughed, that careless laugh of someone who's revealed too much without realizing it yet. "She's always thinking about synergies, market positioning, that sort of thing. But then I actually got to know you." He reached across the table for my hand, his expression suddenly serious. "Well, everything changed for me, Elsie. Completely real." The words should have been reassuring, but something cold settled in my stomach. "Caleb, how much did you know about Bennett Holdings before you met me?" "What do you mean, before you met me?" "Caleb, how much research did you do on Bennett Holdings and my role there?" His silence was more damning than any confession. I watched his face change as he realized what he had revealed, the alcohol-induced honesty giving way to panic. "Elsie, that's not, I mean," he ran his hand through his hair, suddenly looking far more sober. "Look, can we just forget I said anything? I've had too much to drink and I'm not explaining this well." But it was too late. The damage was done. I excused myself to the restroom and immediately called my mother. "Mom, I need you to do some research on the Hartman family and their business practices tonight." "Elsie, what's wrong?" "I think I've made a terrible mistake." By the time I returned to the table, Caleb had sobered up enough to realize he needed to do damage control, but it was too late. The fairy tale was over and reality was ugly. I spent the next day in my mother's office going through every piece of information our research team could compile about the Hartman Industries. The picture that emerged was sobering, but not entirely surprising. I'd been pushing down my growing suspicions for weeks. "They're in more financial trouble than they've publicly disclosed," my mother said, spreading documents across her desk. "3 major clients have terminated contracts in the past 6 months. Their cash flow projections look problematic, and a partnership with us would solve that." A partnership, yes. A merger would solve it completely. The word merger hit me like cold water. I thought about Caleb's questions, his family's sudden interest in my personal life, the timing of everything. "Mom, they're not looking for a business partnership," I said. "They're looking for a buyout disguised as a marriage." My mother's expression hardened in the way that made opposing lawyers reconsider their career choices over my dead body. That evening, I confronted Caleb directly. I'd practiced the conversation multiple times, determined to give him a chance to explain, to prove my suspicions wrong. Part of me still hoped I was being paranoid, that there was some innocent explanation for everything I'd discovered. "We need to talk about your family's financial situation," I said without preamble. When he arrived at my condo, his carefully maintained composure slipped just enough to confirm everything. Lie, business and personal life don't have to intersect. "Don't," I held up a hand. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know about your company's problems. I know about the terminated contracts and the cash flow issues. What I want to know is whether you ever actually cared about me, or if I've been a business strategy from day one." Caleb sat down heavily. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely vulnerable. Not charming, not confident, just tired. "It started as strategy," he admitted quietly. "My mother identified you as someone who could help our family situation. But Elsie, what developed between us became real. I swear to you, my feelings are genuine. How am I supposed to believe that when everything was built on deception? Because I'm asking you to marry me, not just partner with us." But that was exactly what terrified me.
What happens after we're married, Caleb? Do I become another asset for your family to manage? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. 3 weeks before our wedding, and I was living in a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. The guest list had grown to 300 people, most of whom I'd never met. The venue was Victoria's choice, the flowers reflected her preference, and the menu mirrored her taste. Somewhere along the way, my wedding had become the Victoria Hartman show, featuring her son's convenient marriage. But the real pressure came from Caleb about the business merger. It just makes sense to formalize our partnership before the wedding. Think of the efficiency we could achieve. Efficiency, not what we could build together or the future we could create. Efficiency, like I was a quarterly profit margin instead of his future wife. The proposed merger documents arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning, delivered by the Hartman Industries legal team. I called my mother immediately. "Mom, you need to see these papers." An hour later, she was sitting across from my desk, reading through the proposal with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a patient's x-ray. "Absolutely not," she said finally. "This isn't a merger, it's an acquisition. They're offering to buy Bennett Holdings at 20% below market value, with Caleb installed as CEO of the combined entity and my role reduced to Vice President of Operations. You'd report to your husband." The insult was breathtaking. After everything I'd built, everything I'd proven, they wanted to demote me in my own company and hand control to Caleb? They think I'm going to sign away my family's legacy for the privilege of becoming Mrs. Hartman? My mother's expression was glacial. The question is, what does Caleb think this proposal says about his feelings for you? I already knew the answer. If someone loved you, respected you, saw you as an equal partner, they didn't try to absorb your life's work into their failing business empire. That night, I showed the papers to Caleb, spread out on his dining table. "They're standard for this type of business combination," he replied smoothly. "My family has more experience running large-scale operations. My family built Bennett Holdings from nothing. We've been profitable every single year. Profitability isn't everything, Elsie. Vision and leadership matter too." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. This is how he really saw me, as someone who needed his family's guidance to succeed. "I'm not signing these papers," I said clearly. "Then we'll need to postpone the wedding." There it was, the ultimatum I'd been dreading. Sign over my company or lose my fiance. "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a reality. My family won't support a marriage that doesn't benefit our business interests, and I won't go against my family." I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man that proposed in his mother's rose garden. All I saw was a stranger who'd never really existed. "I need time to think. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Elsie. We need to finalize everything now."
But I was already walking toward the door. "I'll let you know my decision." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through the implications of everything that had just happened. The man I thought I loved had just given me an ultimatum: sacrifice my family's company or cancel our wedding. When I got home, I found my mother waiting in the living room with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "We need to discuss your options," she said without preamble. "I think I only have one option." "You have several, but first, let me ask you something." She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. "Do you love him?" The question I'd been avoiding all evening. Did I love Caleb Hartman, or had I fallen in love with a carefully constructed persona designed to manipulate me? I thought I did, but I realized I didn't really know him. My mother nodded. "Then the answer is simple." "Nothing about this feels simple." "It is, though. Do you want to spend the rest of your life wondering if your husband married you or married your company?" Put that way, the choice was obvious. The engagement dinner was supposed to be an intimate family celebration. 24 guests, including both sets of parents, siblings, and a few close friends. Victoria had insisted on hosting at the country club, naturally, and had coordinated every detail down to the flower arrangements. I arrived wearing the navy blue dress Caleb had bought me. feeling like an actor preparing to perform in a play where I hadn't been given the script. The past few weeks had been a careful dance of wedding preparations, while Caleb and his family continued pressuring me about the merger. "Just sign the papers, Elsie," Victoria had said during our final dress fitting. "Business is so complicated for women to handle alone, right? Too complicated for the woman who'd increased her family's company value by 40% in 3 years." The dinner started pleasantly enough. Toasts were made, stories were shared, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot about the underlying tensions. My mother looked elegant in her black cocktail dress, making polite conversation with Victoria, despite her growing dislike for the entire Hartman family. Then came the gift-giving portion of the evening. Victoria stood up, wine glass in hand, wearing a smile that should have served as a warning. "Before we conclude this lovely evening, I have a special gift for our future daughter-in-law." She gestured to a staff member who brought over a large, beautifully wrapped box. "Something practical for your new life together." I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But I was still clinging to the hope that perhaps Victoria was making a genuine effort to welcome me into their family. I opened the box carefully, aware that everyone was watching. Inside, nested in tissue paper, was a complete maid's uniform. Black dress, white apron, even a small cap. The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Victoria started laughing, a tinkling, delighted laugh that encouraged others to join in. Caleb's sister giggled, his father chuckled. Several family friends murmured appreciatively at what they clearly thought was a clever joke. But Caleb looked me straight in the eye, smiled broadly, and said, "Perfect, she'll need it." The laughter grew louder. I felt the blood drain from my face, but my hands remained steady. Years of business negotiations had taught me how to maintain composure under attack, even when that attack came disguised as family humor. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the uniform back at Victoria. I didn't storm out dramatically. I simply looked across the table at my mother. Our eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds. In that look, I communicated everything. The months of subtle insults, the business ultimatums, the complete disrespect for who I was and what I'd accomplished. In that look, my mother understood that her daughter was being treated like hired help by people who believed their money made them superior to our family. My mother's face remained perfectly calm, but I saw the moment she made her decision. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and began typing. "Excuse me," she said pleasantly to the table. "Just need to send a quick message to our legal department." Victoria was still basking in the success of her gift, accepting compliments from other guests about her sense of humor. "It's perfect for the transition. Living in our house, she'll want to help out." This just makes it official. Help out in my future husband's home, where I was apparently expected to serve rather than be served. The message my mother sent was simple. Cancel all Hartman Industries contracts immediately. No further negotiations. She hit send and returned her phone to her purse with the same calm dignity she brought to every business meeting. "Lovely dinner, Victoria," my mother said, standing gracefully. "I think it's time Elsie and I headed home." I stood as well, still holding the uniform. The room gradually quieted as people realized something significant was happening. "Thank you for the gift," I said to Victoria, my voice perfectly steady. "It's very revealing." I set the uniform carefully on my chair and followed my mother toward the exit. "Elsie," Caleb called after me, "where are you going?" "It was just a joke." I turned back to face him. This was the man I thought I would marry in less than 3 weeks. "Was it?" I asked quietly. And then I left, my mother beside me, walking out on what would have been the rest of my life. We didn't speak until we reached our car. "Mom," I started to say. "Do you want to marry him?" she asked simply. No, I said without hesitation. I really don't. Good, because tomorrow we have a wedding to cancel. We spent that entire night systematically dismantling what should have been the happiest day of my life. And honestly, it felt incredible. My mother and I sat at her dining room table with laptops, phones, and a comprehensive contact list that would make any wedding planner weep. We had less than 24 hours to cancel everything before word of the engagement dinner incident spread through our social circles. Florist first, my mother said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. Then came the venue, catering, band, and photographer. I started with the easier calls. Hi, this is Elsie Bennett. I need to cancel my wedding flowers for next Saturday. Oh no, what happened? Let's just say I discovered some fundamental incompatibilities with my fiance. By midnight, we'd canceled the flowers, the 5-course dinner for 200 guests, the string quartet, the photographer, and the vintage Bentley that was supposed to drive me to the church. The vendors were surprisingly understanding. Apparently, last-minute wedding cancellations aren't as rare as you'd think. The church was trickier. Father Morrison had known my family for 20 years, and canceling a wedding less than a week beforehand required some explanation. Are you certain about this decision, Elsie? Pre-wedding anxiety is completely normal. This isn't anxiety, Father. This is clarity. Would you like to talk about what's troubling you? I considered explaining about the maid's uniform, the business ultimatums, and the growing realization that I was marrying a stranger. Instead, I said, sometimes God shows us things about people we need to see. I understand. The church will be available if you change your mind. I wouldn't be changing my mind. The hotel reservations for out-of-town guests took longer to cancel. Each call meant explaining to confused relatives why the wedding was off without going into details I wasn't ready to share. Aunt Sarah, I need to cancel your hotel reservation. Cancel? Honey, the wedding's in 5 days. I know, something's come up. What kind of something? Is Caleb sick? Caleb's fine. I'm just not going through with the wedding. The shocked silence on the other end of the line was becoming familiar. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments. I bet you can't guess how this story really ends. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally hit me. My mother made coffee while I collapsed on her couch, surrounded by confirmation emails for canceled services. How do you feel? She asked, settling beside me with 2 steaming mugs. Terrified, I admitted, and relieved, and embarrassed, and incredibly angry. Good. All of those feelings are appropriate. You almost married him. Mom, I almost signed over everything Dad built because I was lonely and flattered by attention. My mother set down her coffee and looked at me seriously. Elsie, you didn't almost do anything. You saw through his manipulation and made the right choice. That takes strength. It took sending that message canceling their contracts. I sent that message because I watched my daughter being humiliated and disrespected. But you're the one who walked out. You're the one who chose your self-worth over a convenient marriage. The next morning brought the consequences. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with increasingly frantic calls from the Hartman family. First came Caleb's sister. Elsie, what's this about the vendors? Caleb says you had some kind of misunderstanding last night. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Rebecca. Your mother gave me a maid's uniform at our engagement dinner. That was just a joke. You're really going to call off the wedding over a harmless prank? Harmless. Right, because humiliating someone in front of their family and friends is totally harmless. Next came Victoria herself, her voice dripping with false concern. Elsie, dear, I think we need to talk. This little tantrum has gone far enough. Little tantrum? The woman had doubled down instead of apologizing. "Mrs. Hartman, there's nothing to discuss. The wedding is canceled." "Don't be dramatic. We can work through this silly misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. You gave me a maid's uniform and told everyone I'd need it for when I moved into your house. Your son agreed. You made your expectations perfectly clear. I was simply trying to include you in family traditions." "No, you were putting me in my place, and you succeeded. My place is not with your family." I hung up before she could respond. But Caleb himself didn't call until almost noon. When he finally did, his tone was completely different from the charming man I thought I loved. "Elsie, you're embarrassing both our families with this behavior." "I'm embarrassing our families? Your mother gave me cleaning supplies as an engagement gift." "It was a joke. You're being oversensitive, and you're being exactly who you've always been. I just didn't see it clearly before." "Look, we can work this out. Cancel the cancellations, and we'll move forward as planned." The audacity was breathtaking. He genuinely thought I would reverse course and go through with marrying him after everything that had happened. "Caleb, let me be very clear. There will be no wedding. There will be no merger. There will be no relationship between us of any kind. You're making a huge mistake." "Yes, I am. The mistake was saying yes to your proposal in the first place." The aftermath of canceling a wedding less than a week beforehand creates a very specific type of social chaos, especially when the groom's family controls half the guest list and have strong opinions about who was responsible for the misunderstanding. By Monday morning, the narrative war had begun. I discovered this when my assistant, Patricia, knocked on my office door with an expression that usually meant someone was about to ruin my day. "Elsie, you might want to see this," she said, holding up her phone. The social media post was from Victoria Hartman's personal account, a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as wounded disappointment. "Heartbroken for my son today. Planning a wedding brings out the best and worst in people. Sometimes you discover that someone you welcomed into your family doesn't share your values of commitment and loyalty. Praying for healing for everyone involved." Family values. Check. Wedding canceled. Check. The comment section was already filling with sympathy for poor Caleb and speculation about what I'd done wrong. Victoria had positioned herself as the gracious mother-in-law dealing with an unstable, unreliable daughter-in-law. "She didn't mention the maid uniform," Patricia observed. "Of course not. That would require admitting what actually happened." Within hours, the story had spread through our business and social circles. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from friends, colleagues, and relatives demanding to know what really happened. Most conversations followed the same pattern. "Elsie, what's this about you calling off the wedding?" "It's complicated, but everything seemed perfect. Caleb's such a catch. Perfect." If your definition of perfect included manipulation, disrespect, and treating your future wife like domestic help, I developed a standard response. "We discovered some fundamental incompatibilities that made marriage impossible." But the truth was, I was struggling with something I hadn't expected: doubt. When everyone around you insists you've made a terrible mistake, when social media paints you as the villain, when a charming man's family portrays you as unstable, it becomes hard to trust your own judgment. Had I overreacted? Was the uniform really just a misguided joke? Had I thrown away a good man because of my own insecurities? These doubts lasted exactly until Wednesday when Caleb showed up at my office unannounced. "We need to talk," he said, striding past Patricia without being announced. "You can't just walk into my office, Caleb." "I could when we were engaged." "Things change, I suppose." He sat down across from my desk with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. I've been thinking about your concerns, and I'm prepared to make some compromises. Compromises? About the living arrangements. We can start in your condo if that's important to you, and maybe we can restructure the business merger to give you a more prominent role. I stared at him, amazed by his complete failure to understand what had happened. Caleb, you think this is about living arrangements and job titles, isn't it? Women care about those things. There it was, that casual dismissal, that assumption that my concerns were trivial women's issues rather than fundamental questions about respect and partnership. Let me ask you something, I said, leaning forward. When your mother gave me that uniform, what went through your mind? Honestly, I thought it was funny. Mom has an unusual sense of humor. And when you said I'd need it, he shrugged. You would need it. Living in the family home, helping out with household management. It just made practical sense. Household management. Someone has to coordinate the staff and handle the domestic details. Mom's getting older, and it would naturally fall to you as the new daughter-in-law. I felt that familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet. In Caleb's mind, marrying meant acquiring a combination personal assistant and household manager who happened to come with a profitable company. What about my career? My role at Bennett Holdings? That's part of the beauty of the merger. You'd still be involved, but without all the pressure and responsibility. You could focus on our family, he said, as if I were a broodmare whose primary purpose was producing Hartman heirs while managing his mother's social calendar. Get out, I said quietly. Elsie, be reasonable. Get out of my office, get out of my building, and don't contact me again. He stood, his charming mask finally slipping completely. You're making a mistake that will ruin both our companies. Then I guess we'll see who's better at business. After he left, I sat alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline my father had loved. For the first time since the engagement dinner, I felt completely clear about my decision. The wedding date came and went, with all the drama you'd expect from a canceled society event. Saturday morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own condo, wearing comfortable pajamas instead of a wedding dress. Through my bedroom window, I could see the church where I should have been getting married in 3 hours. Instead, I made coffee, read the newspaper, and enjoyed the most peaceful morning I'd had in months. My mother called around 10. How are you feeling? Free, I said, and meant it. Good, because we have some developments you should know about. What kind of developments? The kind where your ex-fiance's business decisions start having consequences. Apparently, Victoria Hartman spent the week making frantic phone calls to potential investors and business partners, trying to salvage deals that depended on the Bennett Holdings merger. Without our partnership, several of Hartman Industries' most important projects were in jeopardy. They approached 3 other companies about potential acquisitions. My mother continued. All 3 turned them down after learning about their financial situation. How do you know all this? Business networks are smaller than people think. When a company desperately shops itself around, word spreads. But the real drama was happening on social media. Some enterprising guest had apparently filmed Victoria's gift presentation at the engagement dinner, and the video was now circulating on various platforms. Watching your future mother-in-law hand you a maid's uniform while her son declares you'll need it hits differently when you can watch it repeatedly. The comments were illuminating. This is abuse disguised as a joke. Imagine being that threatened by your son's fiance. The son's reaction says everything about that family's values. Good for her for walking out. Victoria's carefully crafted narrative about my instability was crumbling as people saw the actual incident rather than her sanitized version of events. But the most satisfying development came Monday morning when Patricia brought me the business journals. "You're going to want to see the financial section," she said, setting several newspapers on my desk. The headline in the Wall Street Journal was perfect. Hartman Industries stock drops 15% following failed merger talks. The article detailed how Hartman Industries had been counting on the Bennett Holdings partnership to secure several major contracts. Without our backing, their clients were reconsidering their commitments. The company that tried to absorb my family's business was now facing its own potential collapse. "There's more," Patricia said, pulling up something on her tablet. Caleb Hartman gave an interview to the Business Chronicle. The interview was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd never taken responsibility for anything in his life. He blames me for the failed merger, suggested I led his family on, and implied that Bennett Holdings wasn't as financially stable as we claimed. "Miss Bennett became emotional and irrational during negotiations," he was quoted as saying. "We realized she might not have the temperament for the kind of high-level business decisions a merger would require." Emotional and irrational, the classic dismissal of any woman who dares to have standards. My mother appeared in my doorway just as I finished reading. "Have you seen Caleb's interview?" "Just finished it. Charming as always." "Good, because I've scheduled our interview with the same publication this afternoon." "Mom, I don't want to get into a public fight." "This isn't a fight, darling. This is business." The interview with Business Chronicle took place in our conference room, with the journalists asking pointed questions about the failed merger and its aftermath. Mr. Hartman suggested that Bennett Holdings wasn't prepared for a major business partnership. The reporter asked, "How do you respond to that?" My mother smiled the way she did before destroying opposing counsel in court. I'd respond by noting that Bennett Holdings has increased revenue by 40% over the past 3 years, while Hartman Industries has lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months. As for being prepared for partnership, we were prepared for an equal partnership between respected companies. We were not prepared to subsidize a failing business through marriage. Can you elaborate on that? The proposed merger terms would have given Hartman Industries control over Bennett Holdings, while offering compensation significantly below market value. When combined with pressure from my daughter to relocate to their family home and assume domestic responsibilities, it became clear that this wasn't a business partnership. It was an acquisition disguised as a romance. The reporter's pen was moving rapidly. "Are you saying the relationship was entirely strategic?" I leaned forward. "I'm saying that when someone's family presents you with a maid's uniform at your engagement dinner and tells you you'll need it, they're communicating their expectations very clearly." "That actually happened," my mother added helpfully. "I'm sure you can find the video online." 3 months after what should have been my wedding day, Karma arrived with a certified letter. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Patricia knocked on my door with an envelope requiring my personal signature. The return address made me smile. Harrison Mitchell and Associates, bankruptcy attorneys. "Hartman Industries is officially filing for," I announced to my mother when she arrived for our weekly business meeting. "Faster than I expected," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "What's their timeline?" I skimmed the legal documents. Liquidation starts immediately. They're selling the family estate, the company assets, everything. And Caleb, according to these papers, is personally liable for several business loans his mother co-signed. Apparently, mixing family money with corporate debt wasn't the brilliant strategy they thought it was. The irony was perfect. The family that had tried to acquire my company through marriage was now losing everything they'd built over 3 generations. Meanwhile, Bennett Holdings was thriving, having secured 2 major contracts that were originally destined for Hartman Industries. But the real satisfaction came that afternoon when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Hartman is here to see you," Patricia said, her expression carefully neutral. Victoria Hartman looked nothing like the imperious woman who'd humiliated me 3 months earlier. Her designer suit was wrinkled, her usually perfect hair showed gray roots, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything. "Elsie," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "I was hoping we could talk about—" "What?" "About helping my family through this difficult time." The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd treated me like domestic help was now asking my help? "I'm listening." "We could acquire some of your assets, keep our employees working, maintain our client relations. It would be mutually beneficial." "Mutually beneficial," I repeated, like her son's marriage proposal. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "That was a misunderstanding. We were trying to find ways for our families to work together. By having me clean your house in a maid's uniform. That was just— I have an unusual sense of humor." The same excuse Caleb had used. Apparently, humiliating people was just their family's quirky personality trait. "Mrs. Hartman, let me be very clear about something. Your family tried to manipulate me into giving up my company and my independence. You treated me like domestic help and expected me to be grateful for the privilege. Now that your schemes have failed and your business is collapsing, you want me to rescue you. We're not asking for a rescue. We're proposing a business arrangement. No, you're begging, and frankly, it feels good to watch." Her mask's polite desperation finally slipped completely. "You vindictive little—" I interrupted. "I'm recording this conversation for legal purposes. Wouldn't want your bankruptcy lawyers to have to explain why you're threatening potential business partners." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this. Our families have connections you can't imagine." "Had connections," I corrected. Past tense. Amazing how quickly those connections disappear when you can't pay your bills. After she left, I sat in my office feeling a satisfaction I've never experienced in any successful business negotiation. This wasn't just about money or market share. This was about justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "We need to talk." I deleted it without responding. 10 minutes later, another text. "Please, Elsie, I know I made mistakes." Delete. A third text. "I'm sorry about the uniform. Mom went too far." Finally, a confession. Too little, too late. I typed back, "Your mother went exactly as far as you allowed her to go. Don't contact me again." But he kept trying. Phone calls that went to voicemail, emails to my work account, even flowers delivered to my office with cards begging for another chance. The flowers went to the hospital charity ward. The voicemails were saved as evidence of harassment. The emails provided entertaining reading during slow business days. Because the truth was, I was thriving without the stress of planning a wedding to a manipulative family. Without the constant pressure to compromise my values, I was sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and making better business decisions than I had in years. Bennett Holdings wasn't just surviving without the Hartman merger. We were flourishing. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what used to be the Hartman Industries building, about to close on the purchase of their former headquarters. The irony was exquisite. The company that had tried to absorb mine through marriage was now selling me their prime real estate at a bankruptcy auction. Justice served with a view of downtown and underground parking. My mother stood beside me, reviewing the final paperwork with our legal team. 30% below market value, she murmured. Even better than we projected. Careful, I said quietly. You're starting to sound like you're enjoying this. I am enjoying this, she replied. They tried to destroy my daughter and steal our company. Watching them lose everything feels appropriate. The bankruptcy coordinator approached with the final documents. Ms. Bennett, we're ready for your signature. As I signed the papers officially transferring ownership of the Hartman building to Bennett Holdings, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the elevators. Caleb stood there in a suit that looked expensive but tired, like he'd been wearing it for days. Our eyes met across the lobby and he started walking toward me. "Elsie," he said when he reached us, "could we talk privately?" My mother stepped protectively closer, but I nodded. 5 minutes. We walked to a corner of the lobby where we could speak without being overheard. Caleb said I wanted to congratulate you, though his voice held no warmth. I said, "It feels like good business, nothing more." "Right, good business." He laughed bitterly. "You know, I actually convinced myself that I loved you. For a while there, I forgot this started as strategy." I said, "That's the saddest thing you've ever said to me." He said, "Why?" I replied, "Because I'm admitting I cared. Because you still don't understand what you lost." Caleb's expression shifted to something resembling genuine confusion. He said, "What I lost was a business opportunity and a beautiful wife." I understand perfectly, and there it was. Even in defeat, even after losing everything, he still saw me as a business opportunity first and a person second. I said, "You lost the chance to be with someone who actually loved you despite your flaws. You lost a partner who would have built something real with you. You lost a woman who was ready to merge her life with yours as equals. But your company would have been part of that partnership, yes, but you never wanted a partner. You wanted an asset. You wanted someone who would make you look good, increase your net worth, and clean your mother's house." Caleb was quiet for a moment, and I thought perhaps he was finally beginning to understand. He said, "Maybe, but you still destroyed my family." And just like that, any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. "I didn't destroy your family, Caleb. You did. When you built a business model around manipulation and entitlement, when you treated partnerships like conquests, when you let your mother humiliate someone you claimed to love, that's when you destroyed everything." I started to walk away, then turned back. "One more thing. The building you're standing in, it's going to be our new headquarters. We're expanding operations and hiring 40 new employees, people who know how to treat partners with respect, people who understand that success comes from building others up, not tearing them down." Caleb's face went pale. He said, "You're not serious." I said, "Dead serious. We'll even keep the Hartman name on the parking garage as a reminder." I rejoined my mother at the signing table where our lawyer was organizing the final documents. She asked, "Everything settled?" I said, "Everything's perfect." But the real victory wasn't the building, or even the satisfaction of watching the Hartmans lose everything they'd built. The real victory was what I'd become in the process of standing up for myself. For years, I'd been so focused on honoring my father's legacy and supporting my mother that I'd forgotten to build my own identity. The Hartman experience had forced me to define my values, set boundaries, and discover what I wouldn't compromise for anyone. Miss Bennett, the bankruptcy coordinator, interrupted my thoughts. "There's one final matter. Mr. Hartman left a sealed envelope for you." I accepted the envelope with curiosity rather than dread. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Caleb's handwriting. "Elsie, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of your company or your money, but because you were the first person who ever believed I could be better than my family's expectations. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to prove you right. I hope you build something beautiful with your life." I read the note twice, feeling something like closure settle over me. It wasn't an apology that changed anything, but it was acknowledgement that he finally understood what he lost. I folded the note, put it in my purse, and walked out of the Hartman Industries building as its new owner. 2 years after the Maid's uniform incident that changed my life, I stood in the same church where I almost married Caleb Hartman. But this time, I was there for a very different reason.
My friend Sarah's daughter was getting married, and as I watched the young bride walk down the aisle toward a man who looked at her like she hung the moon, I felt nothing but happiness for their beginning.
Beautiful ceremony, my mother whispered beside me. It really is. After the service, we joined the reception at a country club across town, not the one where Victoria had orchestrated my humiliation, thankfully. I was chatting with old friends when Sarah approached with a tall, dark-haired man I didn't recognize. Elsie, I'd like you to meet Dr. James Mitchell. James, this is Elsie Bennett, the brilliant businesswoman I was telling you about. Dr. Mitchell had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a genuine smile that suggested he actually listened when people spoke. Pleasure to meet you, Elsie. Sarah mentioned you recently acquired the old Hartman building. That's quite an expansion. It seems like a good investment, plus the location is perfect for our new client services department. We talked for several minutes about business, city development, and eventually our shared love of old architecture. James was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. When he asked if I'd like to continue our conversation over coffee sometime, I found myself saying yes without hesitation. I should warn you, I said as he took down my number. I have trust issues and the tendency to investigate people's backgrounds before second dates. I should warn you, he replied with a grin. I'm a pediatric surgeon who works 60-hour weeks and have absolutely no hidden agenda beyond finding someone interesting to share dinner with occasionally. 6 months later, James and I were planning our own wedding, but this time, everything was different. We chose a small ceremony in my parents' garden with 30 people who genuinely cared about our happiness. James's family welcomed me with warmth and respect. My mother adored him, particularly after he spent an entire dinner asking thoughtful questions about her experiences building the company. Most importantly, James never once asked about merging our professional lives or suggested I change anything about my career to accommodate his preferences. Your success makes me proud, not threatened, he told me when I finally shared the whole Hartman story. Any man who feels otherwise isn't worthy of you. The morning of our wedding, I woke up feeling nothing but excitement and certainty. No doubts, no red flags, no family members treating me like a business acquisition. As I put on my wedding dress, a simple, elegant design I'd chosen myself, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, and meant it completely. "Good, because you look radiant." We heard a car in the driveway, and I glanced out the window to see James arriving with his groomsmen. He looked up at my window and waved, breaking the supposed bad luck rule with typical disregard for superstition. "He's not supposed to see you before the ceremony," my mother laughed. "He's not superstitious, just one more reason I love him," I replied. The ceremony was everything I dreamed of as a little girl playing bride in my mother's garden. Simple, heartfelt, and focused on the commitment James and I were making to each other, rather than the social or business implications of our union. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, James kissed me like we were the only two people in the world. The small crowd cheered, and I felt something I'd never experienced during my engagement to Caleb. Complete confidence that I was exactly where I belonged. At the reception, I gave a short speech thanking everyone for celebrating with us. 2 years ago, I almost married the wrong person for all the wrong reasons. Today, I married my best friend for all the right ones. Thank you for being here to witness the beginning of something beautiful. Later that evening, as James and I danced in my mother's garden under string lights and stars, he said, "Any regrets about the path that brought us here?" I thought about Caleb, the maid's uniform, the months of manipulation, and the ultimate satisfaction of watching the Hartmans lose everything they'd schemed to protect. "None whatsoever," I said. "Every terrible decision they made led me exactly where I needed to be, here, with you, living the life I actually want instead of the life someone else planned for me." As we swayed to music played by a quartet James had hired because he knew I loved classical music,
I realized that true victory isn't defeating your enemies. True victory is building something so beautiful that their approval becomes irrelevant. The Hartman Business Building now housed Bennett Holdings' expanded operations, employing twice as many people as before and serving clients across 3 states. Victoria and Caleb had moved to a different city after the bankruptcy, starting over with nothing but their tarnished reputation. And I was dancing with my husband in my mother's garden, surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I was, building a future based on respect, partnership, and the kind of love that elevates rather than diminishes. Some stories end with revenge. The best ones end with redemption. Mine ended with both.